Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Illinois Arts Council Agency, and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Illinois Stories. I'm Mark McDonald at the Quincy Museum. Every winter they close here to get ready for a new opening in the springtime with a new exhibit. Well, this year it focuses on the businesses that put Quincy on the map, and it's called Historic Quincy Business. Barbara Wilkinson Fletcher. Quincy has, for a city its size, had a footprint, a business footprint, really for much larger cities. There were big companies here throughout the history, weren't there?
Oh, absolutely. Quincy was known all over the world for the different products that were made here and that were exported all over.
Yeah, and that's what this exhibit is all about. It's a city of 40,000 people, but as a manufacturing hub, it was a big deal for many industries.
Oh, absolutely. We had the railroad and the steamboats that carried our produce all over the world. And Quincy was a major hub. There were so many different things that people don't even realize were made or even invented here in Quincy.
And some high-tech stuff.
Oh, very much so.
I mean, there was Motorola, for instance, was a company that was worldwide known. They made most of the car radios in the world were made here in Quincy, and there were thousands of people that worked in that industry.
There were about 4,000 people in that factory at one time and before they closed down. And the radios that they made were just wonderful. So many different models and televisions and car radios and record players. I mean, you can't imagine the amount of entertainment that came out of Quincy.
We both know a man named Olin Schuler who was responsible for this. In fact, we did an Illinois Story with Olin in his collection. He was one of those that worked at Motorola for many years, and he has a wonderful collection, and he's loaned it to you here for this exhibit, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. In fact, Olin this last year donated his collection, wonderful collection of radios and memorabilia to the museum.
Aren't you lucky?
So we will keep it in perpetuity and have it on display off and on for people to enjoy for a long, long time to come.
We mentioned car radios, and this is a good example of what one looked like when you in your first automobile, if you're old enough to know what that looked like. But that's what a car radio looked like. And you had 5 settings. You could punch in your settings, and that was really advanced at the time.
Oh, absolutely. And then the big box was behind the firewall in your car. So you didn't actually see that. All you saw was the little control panel.
Made thousands and thousands and thousands of radios for your kitchen, for your bedroom, for your car, for everywhere.
Clock radios, alarm clock radios.
All these outlandish colors that people wanted at the time in the 50s. You could see what people were attracted to.
The colors are just great.
I know. And they were really starting to do a lot with plastic at the time. They could make anything, any formation of plastic that you wanted, and any color. Really terrific. Over here, we've got a couple of examples of what you might have had in a home model. Now this is an AM and FM model. It has detachable speakers.
It does. This was what they called a T-chest model, and it was one of the high-end Motorola radios, if not the highest end. And the speakers, let's see if I can get it to do it. Speakers come up and they fold over, and then the whole thing, when it's closed, there's a clasp here, and it looks like an old-fashioned T-chest. Or you can take the speakers off and you can put them around the room for a true hi-fi stereo experience.
Sure. And this is a little more modern. This is from 1971, but you can see we were starting to get into, now the speakers are getting bigger, and we're starting to get into high fidelity here.
Right. Of course, this is also solid state, so there's no tubes in this or anything like that. And
here's an example of, now we're talking about plastic now, but this looks like this is a new generation. This looks like it might be
this one's fiberglass.
Fiberglass.
Okay. So this one is kind of low end on the expense spectrum, but this is the kind of thing that you would give your daughter or your son as a gift, and they could travel around with it and take it and play music wherever they wanted.
One of the first big modes of transportation bringing people to Quincy was the steamboat. And most of them were paddle boats at the time. Of course, they were all paddle boats at the time. But this was a big stopping off place for folks up and down the Mississippi, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely huge. Quincy was one of the largest steamboat stops up and down the Mississippi. There was several steamboat packet companies that came in and out of Quincy over the years. They ran many different steamboats.
Mm-hmm.
There's several of them pictured here.
One of the men that ran one of the, I'm not sure what you'd call it, but a line, I guess, of boats was Clat Adams. His name is known for the Riverside Park. And if you look up in the upstairs, or the upper corner there, from the wheel, you'll see that this is where his store was, I guess, and where he ran his the line out of.
He had a store on Front Street, and it was a major gathering place for riverboatmen. The Clat Adams store, he sold everything that you might need if you were a riverboatman coming up and down the river. He had bait and he had lunch, and he, sort of like the store that has a little bit of everything.
No need to go shop anywhere else,
no,
folks.
not
You get
at all.
whatever you need right here.
He was famous for his 5-cent ham sandwiches, which he sold. He had a ham that he had a big glass cover over, and you came in there and you cut off your ham off the slab, put it on a roll, and for 5 cents you had your sandwich. He sold tackle, he sold a little bit of everything.
So you took it up and down the river too,
Sure,
wouldn't he?
absolutely. And then he also ran a packet line and a ferry, and was quite well known on the river.
You know, that reminds me, because you have a neat little exhibit in here about the neighborhood stores. Clat Adams was one of those merchants who had the neighborhood store. But there were others. In fact, before the automobile, these were all over the place. Every corner had a grocery store, right?
Oh, sure. If you go driving around Quincy or any one of a number of towns, you'll see the corner grocery store. Most of them are closed up and they're something else now. But if you look at this case here, there's several of them. Every corner had a grocery store, at least one. Because
If we look at those photographs at the top, you can see now some of these buildings are still there, some of them are gone, but these are from the 1870s on, and of course, like I said, before the automobile, everybody needed a corner market.
Well, sure. You went to Winking's, of course, is still there, but back in the day, nobody had a car, and if a family was lucky enough to have a wagon or a carriage, the gentleman quite often took it during the day, or dad took the car to work, depending on who you were. So you had pension checks that got cashed at the corner store. You could buy postage stamps. A lot of times you could mail a letter there. People had accounts at their corner grocery store. They had butchers right there in the corner grocery, and you know, Sam, the corner butcher, knew exactly how you liked your meat cut, and you know, and what
He might have it cut
cuts you
for
like.
you before you get there.
They had their own milk and dairy licenses. They were able to produce. Some of them produced ice cream and became famous for that. You know, locally famous. If you talk to a lot of the old timers, they have great stories about, you know, the corner butcher or the corner grocer and what, you know, they used to get there.
And like you said, they used to run a tab for you.
Oh, absolutely.
So on payday, you would come in and you'd pay your tab, but in the
tab.
meantime, you could run up a tab if you were a good customer for indefinitely. We mentioned Winking's, and it's the only one that I'm aware of that's still there, but it still looks like it did, doesn't it?
It still does.
Yeah.
And of course, Clat Adams, this is one of the original signs from the corner of his store. It's a big, beautiful enameled sign. And the picture there has Clat out in front of the store.
Right? Yep, and a really nice assortment of the kind of things that you would buy at the a store, and almost everything. Look at the books and tobacco and soap, whatever you need to run a family home on.
A little bit of everything.
Nancy Dixon, we mentioned the steamboats. You know, of course, steam trains came shortly after that, and without the train, Quincy would have just been in a backwash and would never have gotten anywhere. But the train, again, put it on the transportation map.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had several different trains here in town that are at least cross-sectioned here in Quincy. The most famous one was the Chicago Burlington Quincy, or the CBQ. That one still runs through Quincy. The earliest one was the Northern Cross Railroad. And that was done in the 1830s.
Wow, that is early.
It was done after a charter was passed here in Illinois. So initially, railroads were done through either the state or the federal government, and then it became a privatized matter. And so if you look through in here, you'll see some private bonds that were, that showed you purchased part of a railroad or a track, I should say.
So the government got them started, and then they converted over
Yep.
into private hands.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, it's interesting. There were a lot of changes in the railroad industry, obviously, but there must have been some solidarity, because if we look at these depots, this Wabash depot, for instance, is a big, that's a major endeavor.
Yes. Yeah. Wabash and the CB&Q were the two biggest railroads in Quincy at the time. And if you look over onto the right of you, there is a picture there of the CB&Q
Yeah, this
depot.
is huge.
They had 2 or 3 depots, and I believe this one was the last of the ones built.
Yeah, you can see that's a major expenditure, a big investment. Okay, so did we say this is CB&Q?
Yes.
Okay, and the other one here is the Wabash.
Yep, and to the right of that, where all those people are standing, that was a picture taken when the Wabash depot opened up.
Well, so
in
that was a big
1900.
deal. Look at all the hats and
Yep.
suits, and everybody's all duded up for that. That's
Every
a big
time
deal.
something new happened in Quincy, there was always a really large gathering. So it was their entertainment for the time.
Yeah, there was no radio or TV, and everything had to be pretty close together so people could walk to
Yep.
it, and they did. They really did. They
And
turned
a lot
out.
of times you see people with timetables, which was they knew when the train was coming or exiting the stations and things along that. And then these are all the tools that a common conductor and engineer would use on the rails during the early or late 1800s, early 1900s.
And I love the building of this railroad bridge down here.
Yep, that was the wagon railroad bridge for CB&Q.
Barb, pretty exciting times when technology came to Quincy. I mean, and the phone, I guess, was the first demonstration of that, the telephone.
Absolutely, and it was so exciting. People were,
Oh,
they
yeah.
took to the phone like they hadn't taken to anything up to that point.
Yeah.
They were so excited about it. The phone service came to Quincy in June of 1879, and it started out with 20 subscribers. Just 20 people decided they wanted the
And a little
telephone.
private company started this, right?
Little tiny private company. They started it in the Western Union Telegraph office. They shared offices with the telegraph company.
Was it called the Quincy Phone Company, or what was
It was at that point. It was
okay.
called the Quincy Telephone Company. Telephone Exchange, they called it at the
Exchange,
time.
okay.
So there were 20 people. Well, by July, there were 50. By November, there was over 100. And by the time...
Wow, that is fast growth.
It just grew exponentially.
And this is the kind of machine they were using. This one up at the top, I guess, was one of the first ones, huh?
This is the type of phone anyway. What you had to do with a phone like this was you had to crank the crank on the side in order to generate the electricity. There's a battery in there in order to make the signal that went down the wire. And then you were allowed to talk to the operator. So the operator was an integral part of the telephone back then. You could not make a phone call without an operator until around the 1940s. So you would speak to the operator and tell her who you wanted to talk to, either by giving her your exchange number or who you wanted to speak to, and then you could speak.
And then I like this too, because you see this lady speaking on this stick phone here, and you can see just below the phone on the second level there is the ringer. And you can see that's what that is right next door to it. That thing actually manually, it had a little clapper that rang that bell, didn't it?
The clapper is right on the left-hand side of the bell, and it rings really loud. But you could install the bell anywhere you wanted in your home, anywhere within reach of the electrical cord, of course.
Yeah.
And you could put your phone where you liked, which was a real big innovation, because this one you had to mount the phone where you could hear it.
Right. Right.
But the phone was just a huge innovation, and people loved it more than anything.
I love just above that picture of that lady with the stick phone there. You could see in the newspaper they would publish the number of people who had gotten a phone and what their number was.
Yep.
And they had a 3-digit number.
Yes, and a 2-digit number in some cases. It was so exciting. As soon as people got on the telephone or tried the telephone, they would publish their name and number in the newspaper so that you could add them to your list. And of course, that's before they had a phone directory.
Sure. But before long, though, at a growth rate like that, anybody who could afford a phone was going to have one.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they were hooking up just like crazy,
It
right?
was probably the most popular invention that had come out up to that time.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, they were taking orders, grocery orders by telephone. It was part of everybody's advertising.
Absolutely. And then look down here in the corner. There's our Galaxy, Samsung Galaxy, which is where we've ended up. We haven't ended up, but that's where we are now.
I mean, the whole phone is smaller than the Bell.
Right. Okay, follow me in here. Let's take a look at this, because Quincy was also a forerunner in agricultural products. And one of those was a company called Mormon, and people who've lived in Quincy for a while are very familiar with the Mormon name. Our viewers outside of Quincy may not know it, but this family, the Mormon family, developed products for livestock, which apparently, especially hogs, really made a great advancements in production of hogs.
Mormon's was the pioneer in feed supplements for farm animals, especially hogs. They were known all over the Midwest, and even as far, I've seen Mormon advertising and stuff in the far west as well, mostly for cattle out there.
They were big on advertising, weren't they?
Huge. Advertising, I believe, is what made Mormons so successful. They had huge fleets of salesmen who traveled all over the United States, and they had wonderful advertising campaigns, different ones each year that had themes and prizes for the salesmen, prizes for the of huge variety of prizes just for the farmers based on what they would purchase or different things.
They had all kinds of incentives, and they had this gimmick that you like to talk about too. They say the big brown jug there, which is a symbol of Mormon perseverance, but their salesmen would travel around with these little jugs.
These little tiny brown jugs, and what they would do is they would hand out these little jugs, and they would give them to the various farmers and ask them to fill them with water and send them back to Mormons. So if you look at the labels on the jugs, these come from as far away as the Mediterranean Sea, Switzerland, Turkey, and the little jugs, they would fill them with the water and they'd send them back to Mormons here in Quincy, and then they would be poured into Jug Lake, which was a manufactured lake on the Mormon Research Farm.
And that was sort of just it was like a proxy for, this is our worldwide reach.
Absolutely.
Yep,
it was a wonderful promotion. You can't buy advertising like that. I mean, it's just wonderful the way they did things like that.
That is clever. Now, ADM, the international giant, processing giant, now have bought Mormon, right?
They have, and they still make a lot of the feed supplements under the ADM brands. If you look there, those are some of the advertising magazines that Mormons distributed during the war. You see there's a baby chicken issue, Bullets and Pullets.
They were clever.
Encouraging you to raise chickens for the war effort.
Nancy, what is an electric wheel?
Electric Wheel is a company that was founded here in Quincy during the 1890s, and basically what happened was wooden wheels were becoming obsolete, essentially, and a guy named Thomas Hill made this machine here, and this patent right here, that harnessed electricity that ended up putting metal wheel components together. And that's how Electric Wheel got its name.
Okay, put together with the help of electric equipment.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, so these immense wheels, and now it's the company's Titan, right? The company's
Now
Titan.
it's Titan. The name changed in, I believe, the 1880s. after it was bought out by Firestone and then a Canadian company.
Yeah, you can see what it enabled them to do, to make huge wheels that would probably not support equipment that heavy. So it allowed them to make these big metal wheels. Huh?
Yes, they made various farm equipment, tractors, hay, baling machinery, crawlers.
Now they're still in business, and they're still making wheels. And this looks like it's for a truck or an automobile. I'm not sure what it's for.
They make all sorts of wheels still for various things.
Neat. And few people know, or at least I didn't know, that Quincy was, there were dozens of cigar manufacturers in Quincy.
There were quite a bit. It's shocking. Like you said, a lot of people don't realize tobacco is a big business here. But it started during the Civil War, and Quincy got a contract to work with the soldiers, supply them plug tobacco and various products.
Right, so they would import the tobacco, they would make the plugs and the cigars, and then they would go back to the battlefield.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so these plants that's how they got their start. And then they just continued to make cigars, and they developed after the war. They developed a market for
it. They had various different kinds of cigars, different types of tobacco products. Wellman and Dwyer was a very popular company, as well as Empire Plug Tobacco, and I mean their tobacco products were known everywhere.
Up here where it says Wellman and Dwyer cigar mold, how did that work?
It opened up like a sandwich essentially, and you would put the rolled tobacco, which were cigars, and you would put them inside there, and you would press down on it. I would assume it was probably about a week process before they
dry in there.
Before they dried out, and then you just open it back up and take
so
them
they've
out.
maintained, it's like a mold. They've maintained their shape then, and they're ready to smoke. Well, that's really a very old, I don't know how many of those molds are still around, but it looks like there aren't many of those around. That looks really old.
Yeah, the man that supplied a lot of these artifacts for us, he had 2 molds, so.
He did?
Yep.
So you got one of them. That's interesting, very nice. And who would have thought, I wouldn't have thought, there were, I'm looking at this name, to name a few Quincy tobacco factories. It looks like there's about 12 of them listed there, and there were more.
Yeah, almost every corner it seemed like had a tobacco factory, whether it was large or small, whether they dealt with cigars or fine cut tobacco.
Yeah. Huh. Barb, it looks like a rather simple device, but I'll tell you what, back in the day you needed stoves, and you needed a lot of them in most cases. And Quincy had a lot of stove makers, didn't they?
They did. At one time, Quincy had as many as 7 stove manufacturers here.
And big companies.
Absolutely, huge ones.
Yeah.
Channon and Emery, Comstock Castle, Excelsior. They were huge and very well-known stove manufacturers.
You told me, and I believe you, because you're the executive director, you told me that there were more stove makers in Quincy than anywhere in the world.
There were more stoves made here in Quincy than anywhere in the world at one time.
This is it's a good chance to look at the exhibit here and what the different kinds and shapes and sizes that they came in. And we can't spend our time on all these companies, but the Comstock Castle Company is still in business.
They are still located down by the river, and they do still make stoves. They make a lot of pizza ovens and things like that.
Oh, okay. So yeah, there is a market for that, even though people aren't still primarily heating with stoves, but they still need it for cooking, don't they?
For cooking.
Now, this is an interesting company, J.H. Miller. When the World War II effort was underway, all of a sudden, the source for these kinds of figurines dried up because we were not buying from Germany or Japan.
No, there was an embargo on trade with Japan and Germany, and so people could not get little items like, especially nativity scenes, like they were used to being able to buy in the 5 and dime stores. And Tyke Miller, they called him Tyke. His name was John Hardin Miller. He took up the cause by starting to manufacture plaster nativity figures. He sculpted some of them. He and his brother and his wife sculpted some of the first figures themselves, created molds and started manufacturing and painting plaster nativity figures.
And boy, they didn't stop. They went on and on. In fact, the different seasons appealed to them because they went to Easter and they went to all sorts of, Halloween, they went to all a variety. So their business was year round.
Their business ended up being year round. They not only made all of the nativity figures that were sold in Kresge's and several other markets, but they also did
Kresge's, wow. So dime store stuff.
all dime store.
And every town had a Kresge's.
Every town. They also did Halloween, as you can see, and Easter. They are distinctively known for inventing the bobblehead.
Oh no.
Yes. The one of the Halloween figures.
Which one? Is it the
skeleton
back there?
Down there?
He's a bobblehead?
He's a bobblehead.
Oh,
his neck has a spring in it. And one of the bunnies also has a spring in his head. And they are early bobbleheads.
Be doggone. That is...
And like I said, everything that he made could be sold in the local 5 and dime. And he had quite a dynasty.
So then 10 years later, now when the GIs have come back, now he's making war figurines.
Now he's making plaster war figurines, and these were really popular. They were the U.S. Army toy soldiers. And one of the unique things about them is that the faces on a lot of them were sculpted using Hollywood movie actors as models.
No kidding.
So if you look at them, you can quite often pick out who they were modeled after.
Just figure who your favorite stars were in the movies, and you'll probably find them in the figurines here.
In the 1950s.
Fascinating. Well, Barb, thank you so much to both you and Nancy for showing us through.
Well, thank you.
You've done a lot of work since the beginning of the year, and it shows well.
We have a wonderful crew, so thank you very much.
Thank you. If you're interested in historic business Quincy, it's here until the end of the year, and a special bonus, they have an enormous new butterfly collection that's being seen for the first time this season as well. With another Illinois Story in Quincy, I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Illinois Arts Council Agency, and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you.